Good evening, everybody. We left off on page 53. After they arrived at the Chicago PD station from the hospital, where Kyle had been declared healthy, Kiri let Amber and Kyle greet each other. She saw in Amber's eyes the same look she had seen in adults' eyes when they almost lost a loved one. She had to admit, she had only seen it in a child a few times. The children were typically just happy to see their loved one returned. She felt sorry for Amber. The child was brilliant. She had a fantastic memory. She was kind. She wanted to do the right thing. She cared for her friend like he was her own brother, and she had a very directed goal for her adult life. She was a parent's dream, and yet she seemed so experienced with the harder aspects of life. "It's okay if you get away," Kiri remembered the little girl saying. That wasn't something a child said unless they meant it. Kiri was about to step inside the witness room and take Kyle to a separate room to question him when she saw out of the corner of her eye that the police were leading two people into the crime lab. They stepped out of the stairwell, handcuffed and looking very annoyed. Kiri looked back at the two children, then motioned for the guard to keep track of them. She walked toward the two annoyed people, a man and a woman, dressed in jeans and t-shirts. The woman's hair was pulled back, and they both had work boots on. "Lieutenant, this is Mr. and Mrs. Wilkes, Amber Wilkes' parents. They called in and said they couldn't come to the station before 1300, so we carried out your orders, ma'am." Kiri nodded. Her orders were to arrest the Wilkes if they refused to come for a second time. She looked at both of them and asked, "What was more important than your daughter, Mr. and Mrs. Wilkes?" They didn't answer at first, but after a moment, Mr. Wilkes said, "We had to work, Lieutenant. If we didn't work, our daughter wouldn't have any food in the house." "You had to work last night at 2100? Kiri asked suspiciously. "And this morning?" "That's right," Mrs. Wilkes said. Kiri could tell they were lying, and she could tell they were nervous. She turned to the officer and said, "Take them to separate questioning rooms, and take them that way." She pointed in the opposite direction. She didn't want them going past the witness room where Amber was. The officer nodded and led the two of them away. Kiri sighed and turned back to the witness room to get Kyle. "Lieutenant O'Malley," she heard behind her. She turned around and saw the paramedic, Peter Sanders. "Mr. Sanders, what can I do for you?" she asked, surprised to see him. "A little girl who needs a standard exam?" Peter asked her. "I got the call about an hour ago." "Yes, she's in the witness room. Kiri looked over to the officer taking Amber's parents away and waited until they turned the corner. "This little girl, I suspect she's being abused at home. She's got a fairly large bruise on her arm. If you could scan her and see if she's got any previous fractures. I don't think she has any current fractures, but I can't be absolutely sure. She's very defensive. I'm going to explain to her that everybody has to have a physical done at some point, and this is just to make sure she's healthy. She's not going to want to cooperate, but this is the only way to prove my theory and protect her." "I understand," Peter said, his eyes sympathetic. "I've dealt with abused children before. I'll let you know what I find, Lieutenant." Kiri nodded. "Thank you. I'll go talk to her, and we'll move to a different room for the exam." She entered the witness room and said, "Kyle, buddy, I need you to come with me. I've got to ask you some questions, and we'll get you some food, all right?" Kyle was reluctant to leave Amber, but he nodded and walked over to Kiri. He could trust Kiri. "Go wait right outside the door, Kyle. I'll be right with you, and if you need anything, the officer will take care of you." She wanted to be sure he understood he was safe. "Okay," Kyle said cautiously as he walked outside the witness room. Kiri waited for the door to close. "Amber, a friend of mine is here to see you. His name is Mr. Sanders, and he's a paramedic. Do you know what that is?" Amber nodded. "Now, I don't want to have to do this, but there's no way around it. You have to have a checkup. Everyone does. I had mine a few months ago. So Mr. Sanders is going to give you a checkup, and I promise you he'll be very gentle, and I'll stay with you the whole time." Amber stared at her for a minute and then said, "I'm fine. I don't need a checkup." "I know you don't, but it's my job to make sure you have one. If I don't, then I'll get into trouble." Amber thought about this before she nodded slowly. "All right, fine." Kiri nodded. "Thank you, Amber. Okay, I'm going to take Kyle to a separate witness room, and then Mr. Sanders and you and I are all going to head to a room without glass walls, so that you'll have a bit of privacy." Amber nodded, and Kiri exited. Once Kyle was situated, Kiri led Amber and Peter Sanders into a new room and closed the door behind her. She lowered the shade and stood aside. "Hi, Amber. My name's Peter," Peter greeted her, holding out his hand politely. Amber took his hand and shook it, but said nothing. "I'm supposed to do a checkup. You've had a checkup before, right?" Amber nodded. Yeah. Well, no shots are involved in this one. Just going to make sure you're healthy, okay? Amber nodded slowly. All right, why don't you sit right there in that chair, get comfy, okay? Peter said gently and knelt down. Want to take your shoes off for me? You can keep your socks on. Amber looked at Kiri, who nodded. Amber unsnapped her shoes and kicked them off. Okay, great. I'm going to wave this around, and it's going to make some noises, but it won't touch you. It's basically going to take pictures of your bones and show them to me, just to make sure nothing's broken, okay? Amber nodded and stayed still while he scanned her and downloaded the results into a handheld pad. Okay, that part's done. Now, Amber, could you stand up for me? Amber studied Kiri and Peter intensely as she stood up, watching their every move. Peter waved the scanner over her pants, all the while making note of the screen on his pad, which showed bruises around her hips, large enough to have come from a baseball bat. He kept his face expressionless, except for the occasional reassuring smile to the child. When he had downloaded the results completely, he asked gently, Do you have a tummy ache? She shook her head vehemently. No, she said. Peter tried not to look skeptical at her answer. Okay, do you mind if I lift up your shirt and look at your tummy? Amber automatically wrapped her arms around her t-shirt. No, that's a bad idea. Don't worry, Amber, nobody's going to get you into trouble. I promise, Kiri said. Amber hesitated, looking terribly conflicted. I don't want to, she said. Peter nodded. Okay, that's okay. Lieutenant O'Malley, could I talk to you outside? Kiri nodded and smiled at Amber. You did great, she said. I'll be right outside the door. They left the room and Peter handed the pad to Kiri. She's got multiple contusions on each limb, and her torso is of particular concern. The scanner picked up possible past bruising to her internal organs, but it will require more sophisticated screening at a hospital to be certain. I'm not sure about cuts and scrapes, as this can't detect them. She's had multiple broken bones in the past, 3 broken fingers, an ankle fracture, and a broken wrist. Kiri looked at the data mournfully. We have the parents in custody. Do me a favor and submit these to a doctor. Have him confirm the results and send them back to me. The bruising and the broken bones are not from playing football in the backyard. This child is obviously abused. We'll have a stronger case if she admits it, but I don't see that happening for a while. Kiri looked back into the witness room and gazed at Amber as she peacefully colored. Any sign of other kinds of abuse that your instruments detected? This scanner didn't detect sexual abuse and it can't check for psychological abuse, Peter said. But if you get her into a hospital, they can do a quick check with a choice machine and tell you that information. When we get this sorted out, that's exactly what I'll do. I have no idea why her choices at school didn't catch this, Kiri said. Peter nodded. The little boy, Kyle, has he been reunited with his parents? He asked, knowing the boy had been lost. Kyle's situation is a little more complicated than that. He's in our protection, though. If his father decided to tell them the truth about the entire ordeal, and he was coerced as Kiri suspected, the boy might eventually get to live with Derek again. Peter nodded. If you need my help for anything else, you know where to call. Cook County Central General Dispatch. Kiri smiled. Thanks. I'll call you if we need you. Justin came up to her as soon as he saw Peter leave. He had been waiting nearby. I need you to start questioning Derek, Kiri told him before he could speak. We've lost precious time today with this case, and we need to make up for it. I'm going to question Kyle. It's doubtful Derek will talk, but Kyle probably will. Justin nodded and said, I'll see what I can do. I'll be in to talk with him when I'm finished with Kyle. Any other cases come in? Nikki said there was a call about a shooting, unrelated to this case. The police arrived on scene, and as soon as Sarah got back, Nikki took her and headed over. They're covering it. Other than that, this case is it for our lab. Kiri nodded. All right, thank you. Is that what you came to tell me? He nodded in response, and she said, Great, thanks, Justin. If you finish early with Derek, come get me and we'll go over your results. I want to know if he was approached by the Diablo or if he approached them. We'll read more tomorrow.